Hello everybody and welcome to Primetime Mitch, and today I will be ranking the worst to the best of the Final Destination franchise. From the very first movie, Final Destination in 2000, sparked another 4 sequels over the space of 11 years. This was a new take on horror involving teens, straying away from the usual slasher concept we'd been accustomed to at that time, instead focusing on premonitions and the villain being death itself. Final Destination originally was penned as an X-Files script, a standalone episode entitled Flight 180. But if you want to look even further back, the inspiration for the Final Destination movies came in the form of a movie called Soul Survivor from 1984. A similar theme involving a plane crash survivor being haunted by ghosts of the dead. Possible inspiration for this lies 3 years before in the form of The Survivor, starring Robert Powell. So of the 5 movies of this popular franchise, how does my tier look? Well, let's go and find out, shall we? Quick shout out to my sponsors right before we get to the tier list. Dyslexic Heart Designs on Etsy, some wonderful cartoon designs of famous movies, wonderful alternative posters. Also Geeky Illustrator on Etsy again as well, simplistic cartoon designs of famous movies and their posters. Please check them out, they are wonderful for the wall. I have them everywhere and they brighten my day every day. Thank you to my sponsors for supporting these videos. So at the very top of my tier I have Gory Glory. This is what I believe to be the best movie in the franchise. This is only my opinion, this is a personal choice. You may have differing opinions, please leave them in the comments below. I'm always interested to see just how contrasting other people's opinions on these movies are compared to mine. So first of all, Gory Glory, that will be the top #1 best movie, in my opinion, of the Final Destination franchise. Now, it is important to point out here that I actually have an overall very positive view of the majority of these movies. So even if it is second, third and fourth down the list, it doesn't necessarily mean I think it's a bad movie or in any way average. It's just, you know, it's about picking the best of the bunch. So second down, Screaming for Joy. This is a close second. Obviously very, very close to being great, but not quite great. And speaking of great, just below we have Dicing with Greatness. It's almost there. It's very good, but it's not quite in the level of the top 2. And below Dicing with Greatness, we've got Bloody Good. Now, obviously in England, that is a coarse word, but it is very much appropriate for the 4th film in this tier. Still pretty good, not quite on the level of the top 3. And my final one, I think you've probably all got a decent idea of where this is going to go if you look at overall opinion, but Kill It Please is at the bottom of this list, and maybe that's where I can finally get what I need to get off my chest. That is the worst of the franchise to me. So let's kick it off. Let's look exactly how these are ordered. Okay, so we're going to start at the bottom. We've got to end on a positive, of course. Kill It Please. I'm just going to go ahead and do it. Final Destination 4. Or appallingly, The Final Destination, as this was supposed to be the last of the franchise. It failed so dramatically and had such negative response, they had to then go and make up for their mistakes. They had to go and right the wrongs, so to speak. This movie I absolutely detest. I do not hate many movies to the point where they offend me and I am angry when I see them. This one I do. This was off the back of 3 very successful movies, 3 very enjoyable movies, and to label it The Final Destination, when this first came out I was excited. This was going to be the conclusion to this incredible story of evading death and trying to rearrange your future and change the design, and this is going to be the final Destination, and I could understand why they would go with that title had they produced a movie worthy of it. What they did is the complete opposite. It was so disrespectful of the 3 films that went before. It is drenched in CGI, and not good CGI either. We've seen CGI in Final Destination movies before, never to these depths. This was like a parody. This was like a spoof of the Final Destination movies, and that is grossly offensive to somebody that enjoys that series of movies so much. I can't say anything positive. I struggle to find positives in this movie. It was purely made for 3D and nothing more. The story was weak, characters wholly unlikable. I think there's maybe one character in it that you feel something for, and that's Miketi Williamson's character. This is a guy that was far too good for this movie. He played Bubba in Forrest Gump, for Christ's sake, and yet he ends up in this, no pun intended, car crash of a production. And even his character, though likeable, was wholly unbelievable. He apparently killed his wife and child in a car crash that he was drunk at the wheel. I mean, I'm pretty sure he'd be in prison for manslaughter, but nevertheless, we'll sweep that one under the carpet, like we're going to do with this movie in a moment when I've finally got everything I want to say about it off my chest. There is a horrible lack of reference to the movies before. If you're making a concluding movie in a franchise, how can you ignore what has come before? And when I heard that they were going to make very little reference to it and it was going to be detached from the first three, my heart sank. That was my premonition that this movie was going to be a pile of shit. And I think throughout you can tell nobody in the cast really gives a f*** about this movie. Apparently the 3D cameras and the whole 3D element of the movie made the shooting of it particularly unbearable, so that can't have helped. Like I said before, unlikable characters.
Down in front, asshole!
Spooky psycho babble.
Tell me again why we chose this over seeing the movie.
It pelts you with cliches from the start. The jock guy involved in a really unnecessarily gratuitous poolside scene as well, which wasn't becoming of the Final Destination franchise. It's never been that. That's more sort of what Friday the 13th would do or something in its own right. The only good thing I can say about this movie is probably the title sequence at the beginning. That seems to be the most effort they put into this film. I used to like the tyre coming over the stadium and splattering the girl. Since I've watched it back, it really isn't that great. The disaster at the start just seems ludicrous. You know, cars continuously driving around the track despite the carnage that's going on around them. Parts of the vehicles flying off in all directions, defying logic. And there is so much that defies logic. Even in the explosion in the mall at the end, her leg gets caught in the escalator and blood comes out of her mouth. Just little things like that when you are making a movie. How does nobody sort of put their hand up and go, maybe that doesn't make any sense? And the sickening thing about this absolute shambles of a production is that it is the producer and director and writer from Final Destination 2. No excuse. Absolutely no excuse. Horrible attempts to be subtle, yet aren't subtle.
I've got my eye on you two.
So badly acted, so badly delivered, and the body going through the wire fence, again, just done purely for 3D, made zero sense at all. Anatomically, would not happen. Hate it, will never like it, wish it didn't exist, wish it wasn't part of the franchise, and yeah, Final Destination 4. Coming in at bloody good, fourth in the tier, again, not a slur on the movie whatsoever, is the very original first Final Destination. Simply the reason it's fourth in the list is because it's the most basic. They improved over time, but except in the last rant I had. They improved the movies, therefore they leapfrogged the original, and that is not a bad thing in any way, and it is certainly not knocking the original in any way. We've got a couple of very good lead characters in there. Ali Larter and Devon Sawa doing great work as Clea and Alex. Very believable, troubled people in different ways. Alex is very much troubled by what happens at the start of the movie and his premonition, and how he sort of is the focal point of everything as a result of that. Clea is a troubled girl in her own right. You can tell she doesn't have much of a family, and obviously you hear some very tragic backstory later on.
I was 10. My dad went into a 7-Eleven for cigarettes. I guess that he heard someone say, "Don't turn around," so on reflex, or thinking it was a friend joking, he did. And a guy blew his head off.
And she almost gravitates towards Alex. It's a wonderful sort of combination without it becoming a big romance. I know there was a deleted scene where that was supposed to be apparent. It didn't need it, and they did a good job by removing that. The plane explosion at the beginning is subtle. It's not too much. They obviously elaborate the original disaster over time in the movies that followed. This was sort of the more basic one. great effects nonetheless, a really believable explosion, and really quite terrifying when it comes to people. You know, if you don't like flying, which I don't particularly like flying, that sort of movie really hit a chord with just how raw that opening scene is. The deaths are varied. It slows down a little bit in some parts of the movie, but it's barely, you know, you can't really tell. The deaths are there's not too many gaps between deaths. You are constantly kept on edge. And a nice conclusion as well, where you sort of see Kurt Smith's bad guy character sort of change because he appreciates life, because he has this newfound appreciation for everyone around him, and he's friends now with Alex and Clea, and you think surely that's not how the movie ends. Absolutely it isn't how the movie ends. Whacked by the falling sign. Great way to finish the film, and really it's an experience, and a really good one. In at Dicing with Greatness, this may divide opinion. This, I think, 3 and 2 are probably going to be where people sort of question me a little bit. Please do, I'm open to hearing it. But Dicing with Greatness, in at the 3rd best Final Destination entry, is number 5. The final Final Destination entry, the reworked movie to try and clean up the that Final Destination 4 had caused, and it was badly needed. This brought back some credibility to the franchise that the 4th one really damaged, in my opinion. A fabulous opening disaster sequence with the bridge collapse, and so much work and effort obviously went into making that look as real as possible. It's slightly 3D reliant during that opening sequence in some parts, like with the pieces of metal sliding off the back of the truck and going through Sam and Peter, and obviously with Candice falling from the bridge and going through the sailboat mast. But it doesn't detract, because what's going on around it is so well produced, and it looks so much better than that god-awful NASCAR crash at the start of the previous movie. You can tell real effort has gone into making this look as realistic as possible. They have obviously noticed their mistakes. There are a few unlikable characters in this movie, similar to, well, not similar to 4. 4 is full of them. This one has a couple. I think Peter becomes very unlikable as the movie goes on. The more desperate he becomes to take somebody's life.
Yum dim sum.
Obviously Isaac is a horrific character, but he has got an element of comedy about him, whereas the unlikable characters in the previous movie just didn't raise a smile at all. Those characters can slightly hamper it a little, but it's very minimal. You can put these characters into, you can't love everybody, but you can put these characters in if the movie is solid. The 4th one wasn't, this one was. It is great to see the return of Tony Todd, just as sinister as ever as William Bloodworth. I don't think his name is actually referenced at any point during any of the movies, but he's always credited as that, so you've got to wait for the credits to find out his actual character name. Many people see Tony Todd's character as being Death himself, personified. I believe that strongly. The absolute most brutal scene to me in Final Destination, there are so many, but I have a real problem with bones and joints, so the gymnastics scene is hellish to me. I seized up in the movie theatre for a good 15 minutes after that and could not relax, and the build up to it was outstanding. It was actually quoted in quite a few newspapers and movie reviews as being an incredible 10 minutes of pure anxiety, and they did it so well, they built it up so well, and nobody would have predicted that that was how Candice was gonna end her days. And I can't talk about Final Destination 5 without mentioning the glorious twist ending, the most perfect tribute to Final Destination fans who've been besmirched so terribly in the movie before, to go full circle, to turn this movie into a prequel right at the last minute. And it's interesting to know, and I'd like to know if you mention in the comments when it was you realised what was going on. I was so engrossed in the movie that I didn't even for one second think he was going to, he's going to France, he's going on a flight to France. So the first one was about a trip to France. Never once did I think about that. I was too engrossed in it, which is testament to the movie in itself. I am sorry, and I feel very stupid for it, but I only noticed when the flashback to the original footage of the fight on the plane. Soon as I saw that, then I realised, then my jaw dropped, then my heart started racing. I was so happy they'd done that. In that moment, I forgave them for 4, and we got that incredible sort of recreation of the first Final Destination disaster. I was a little confused when I was coming out of the place as to how nothing had been mentioned in the first one of debris landing into the town and destroying buildings and stuff. I didn't care so much. That was a passing thought. But Final Destination 5 is third on the list and a great movie. Coming in at screaming for joy is the third Final Destination. Many people actually have put this down on their list. Again, I'm always interested to know why. I think this really plays on the fear of having no control, which is what Jay says to Wendy in the theme park before they go on the roller coaster. I can completely relate to that fear of no control and that worry. Again, I have a fear of heights, so I do love roller coasters, but I do hate it when they go to the heights. I hate the tick, tick, tick going up. They really capture that worry and that fear beautifully, and the fact that Wendy is so terrified throughout and yet everybody else is having a great time really isolates her. So a really good opening scene at the amusement park, and a brilliantly shot disaster as well. I thought it went on a little long when they were up on the loop and they were pushing it back, but it sort of ends pretty quickly after that, so I sort of gave it some leeway there. Probably one of my favourite concepts of the Final Destination franchise was the photographs. Seeing each death in the photographs and trying to work out how they might portray the demise of each character. Obviously they get it wrong on some occasions. They don't see the fan on Frankie's head in that photo. They're too busy looking at something else, which it ends up not being, with the rope bridge. That was something new, something a little different. It's probably been done in other movies in other ways, but I think it really belonged in these Final Destination movies. One thing I want to mention is I talked about the character relationship between Clea and Alex in the first Final Destination. The relationship between Kevin and Wendy in this movie, Mary Elizabeth Winstead and Ryan Merriman did a great job. The fact that they didn't even like each other at the start.
We don't even like each other.
They had this connection purely through their other halves. One was going to leave the other, and I think it was just interesting how she said we'd never be friends if it wasn't for those two, and they become friends at the end of it because of this fight against death and trying to stay alive. I like the development of the relationship throughout this movie. It was a little different to Alex and Clea, who had an instant connection. These two had to really gradually bond. The tanning salon death is utterly sadistic, and again, one thing that the Final Destination movies do so well, which I will mention in the next one, is they strike an apprehension in you for doing simple things, simple everyday things, enjoyable things even, and the tanning salon is exactly that. So many people say I get afraid when I go to a tanning salon now in case I get locked in it and that sort of thing happens. I always second guess myself. That is a sign of a good movie, that they've filmed it, they shot it, and they've put the idea together in a way that has created a fear in somebody that they didn't know they had. I just want to point out as well, I love 3 because I think it's the most ruthless movie. I think Wendy at some point says, did you see how vicious it was?
It's not only horrible, but can you feel how vicious it was?
Exactly how I felt about this movie. It was so relentlessly brutal, and it is no more seen than in the final scene, subway derailment. That train crash is absolutely terrifying. I remember sitting with my dad. I went to watch that movie with my dad, and he was like, wow, that was horrific. That the train crash was absolutely horrific. What a great way to end the movie. Again, very similar to the first one. They end on a high. I love 3. Many people would put this nearer the bottom and probably put 5 above it, but I really, really enjoy 3. And now to my absolute all-time favourite Final Destination movie. This is Final Destination 2 from 2003. This is, to me, the greatest of the franchise. You only have to look at the start of the movie. One of the most well-made road accident scenes. It just shows, and it really shows to the likes of 4, that hard work pays off. They put an awful lot of effort into the realism of this crash, because every day people are driving their cars to work, they're driving their cars left, right and centre to go to the store, and they are on the motorways, the freeways if you're in America. They are always on the move, and they created something that could happen at any time to anybody. And they did it brilliantly. There was nothing remotely unrealistic, I don't think, about that first scene. I think the only thing that they elaborated in order to create the effect, which is one of the best effects, so I'm so glad they did, was the logs coming off the truck. They sort of bounced and rolled in the original, so they had to make it so that they got a good bounce so that it timed with going through the windshield of the cop's car. Amazing effects. And again, just like the tanning salon, people now, they get a little jittery when they see the truck full of logs come past them on the road. So they've created something in people. Absolutely amazing opening scene, which set a premise for an excellent movie. Everybody in this movie is believable. You don't really have any unlikable characters. I think the most unlikable character in this movie is the first one to go. Evan's horrible eye death. He is the most unlikable character, I think, out of all of them. They dispose of him pretty quickly, and that's probably the way to do it. If that was the case, then 4 would have lost them all in the first 5 minutes. Every single kill is inventive. It is beautifully shot. It is different from the last. There is not a heavy reliance on green screen and CGI. I think the most you see is probably Rory's death when he's cut by the flying fence. It's so subtly and beautifully done, you don't even notice how it's done. The characters are not only believable, but they are flawed, but you do not dislike them for their flaws. You almost feel sorry for a lot of them, especially the mother, who has, obviously she said she'd buried her husband, and then obviously she loses her son. She's on Valium. She is just breaking down.
If it is my time to go and be in heaven with my family, I can accept that.
You feel bad for her. You even feel bad for Kat, who is like desperate for a relationship, desperate for a normal life, and she's obviously got some real sort of anxiety going on day to day. So the flaws really lend to the movie, as opposed to just wishing they'd go. You do not want death to win, and in this one it's quite sad a lot of the time when it does. My favourite part of Final Destination 2, this divides. I think some people think it's a bit far-fetched, others love it. I love it. And that is the connection to the first movie. Every character in this movie is alive because of the death of the guys in the first one. That, to me, was the crowning element of this movie that put it top of the list. I love the connection. I love how it's thought out. And you don't forget the movie that came before. Certainly not in the sequel, and obviously that was my biggest problem. One of my biggest problems of the many with the fourth installment is there was just no respect given to what's come before. That conversation in the car where they all realise where they are now because of someone else's misfortunes.
I don't know. I never made it. The bus I was on splattered some girl all over the road.
Was that not Abraham?
Yes.
That derive from the similar situation, the premonition. It is just that to me is what puts this movie above the others. I loved that connection. It might be an acquired taste, but it's certainly mine. You get a great ending again. The barbecue explosion's actually quite terrifying, but the arm on the table just gives you one last laugh before the credits. The perfect Final Destination movie to me, hands down. I will never change my decision on that unless they do something miraculous. That was my tier list for the Final Destination movies. I really hope you enjoyed it. Please smash a like, please subscribe, get down in the comments and tell me your list of Final Destination rankings. Tell me why. I am interested to see just how different they are to mine. I'm pretty sure we might be unanimous on the final one, as in the worst one, but the other 4 are always open and subject to a creative discussion. Thank you so much for viewing this, and I'll be back to you real soon. This has been Primetime Mitch.